Good morning, welcome to the Prado Museum. We're here a couple minutes before opening to the public for our weekly sessions in English. Thanks so much to the American Friends of the Prado Museum for making these sessions possible. I encourage you to check out the organization as well as our sister organization here in Spain, Fundación Amigos del Museo del Prado. We're here today in room 52C of the Prado Museum to take a look at this beautiful work of art by Domingo Carvalho. This was painted in the 1530s in Portugal. Now, this work of art has some really interesting layers of interest that we're going to talk about today. First, the level of detail in the work of art. Additionally, a lot of symbolism that tells us who is in this painting and what they're talking about. And third, a lot of mystery around the painter. So Domingo Carvalho, little is known about his life. We know that he was painting in Lisbon in the 1530s, but not much more about him. But even more interesting is that this painting seems to be talking about two different subjects, two different women from different parts of history. So first, looking at some of the details of this painting, it is really a feast for the eyes. As we can see, we have a woman painted in the center of the composition. Behind her, she's in an interior space, and the level of detail in the wallpaper, in the curtains, is absolutely incredible. She's painted with a jeweled crown and a halo around her head, which tells us that she is of noble background, that she is sacred. And really looking at her dress, which for me is my favorite part, the textures in the front of her gown. We see patterns, both organic and geometric, throughout her dress in the sleeves, which is just an experience to look at and to explore. Now, this painting is also filled with symbolism that helps us understand who this person is. And one person that we know is depicted in this portrait is Saint Catherine of Alexandria. She was of noble blood, a princess living in the 4th century in Egypt, which at that point was under Roman rule by the Emperor Maxentius. Now, we see the crown, which is often a symbol of Saint Catherine, referring to her noble background. We also notice that she's got the halo around her head, again, which tells us that she is a saint, she is sacred. In this case, she has died defending the Christian religion. But a really important symbol of Saint Catherine, which we see in almost every image of her, is sort of hidden down here in the lower right-hand side of the painting. We see the wheel. And the wheel is essentially the type of execution that was assigned to her by Maxentius. When she refused to marry him, she was sentenced to be executed on the wheel. However, a miracle took place. Angels came down, the wheel was set on fire, and she was briefly saved before she was then sentenced to be executed, being beheaded with the sword. So we see often Saint Catherine depicted with this sword as well. This sword is also interesting. If we look at the details on the handle, we can see it's sort of got a thorny texture, which refers to Jesus and his sacrifice. But additionally, Carvalho has used the sword as his place to attribute this painting to himself. So if we look carefully, we actually see his signature right there on the blade. And again, this is the only painting which is actually officially attributed to him. Now, all of these symbols working together tell us that this is Saint Catherine, but there are some other symbols that we don't see here in this painting, which you will often see in a depiction of her. Those include a quill and a book, and those two symbols really point us to the idea of her scholarliness and her dedication to philosophy. So part of the legend, her legend, is about her defeating 50 philosophers who were sent to her to try to convince her to move away from Christianity, and she defeated all of them with her wit. So she is the saint of philosophers and scholars, and becomes really popular in the Middle Ages. Now, the other character that is possibly depicted here is another Catherine, Catherine of Austria, who's the Queen of Portugal. And so this painting is officially called St. Catherine of Alexandria, possibly Portrait of Catherine of Austria. Now, Catherine of Austria is a Habsburg princess who is the daughter of Felipe I and Juana of Castile and Aragon. She is the youngest daughter in her family and is born at a turbulent moment in her family's history. Her mother was pregnant with her during the moment when her father was killed. And there's a complicated story of Catherine's grandfather and brother working to relinquish power from her mother, Juana de Castilla, and basically they incarcerated her in Tordesillas in a palace for the rest of her life, citing that she was insane and unable to run her kingdom. Now, because Catherine was a baby when this happened, she was actually raised in incarceration with her mother in Tordesillas, and she remained there until she was 18 years old, at which point she was betrothed to marry King Joan III of Portugal, at which point she moved to Lisbon and became Queen of Portugal. Now, when we look at this painting, we know that Catherine would have been in her mid-20s, around 1537 when we believe this painting was created. So seeing her young adds up. We also notice that she's got red hair and a long nose, which also tracks with other portraits that we see of her at the time. We also know, of course, that Carvalho is painting in Lisbon, and so to see this royal figure aligns with the idea that it could be Catherine of Austria, Queen of Portugal. Now, one of the most important connections between these two figures is also their dedication to scholarship, we know, obviously, that Saint Catherine is our patron saint of scholarship and philosophy, but Catherine of Austria was also very dedicated to scholarship and education. She accumulated a large library in the palace and was really dedicated to the education of her children. But more interestingly, she also was bringing female philosophers and scholars from around Portugal to be part of her household in order to influence the education of her children. So that connection between the two women is very interesting. So when we think about these two figures, obviously both of them have a history of strife and oppression. We see Saint Catherine being killed, being executed for defending the Christians and her religion. We see Catherine of Austria, who's incarcerated with her mother for the first part of her life. But we also see both of these characters as symbols of female intelligence and power. So I invite you to come visit this work of art to see it more closely, inspect all of the details, but also see the layers of looking at these two women encapsulated in one work of art. Thank you so much for joining me today for this session in English. I hope that you'll join us next week.